When societies become more equal, economies become more resilient, but they cannot reach their full potential when the law restricts women's rights and opportunities. Welcome to the Legal Barriers to Women's Rights and Opportunities. This course examines the legal and regulatory barriers hindering women's rights and access to equal economic opportunity. When laws restrict women's voices and agency and fail to protect them from violence, women are less likely to participate in the economy. We will review global data that underscores the discrimination and bias that women face. We will also look at legal efforts to remove these barriers and the positive effects that reforms have on women and countries at large. While this course and the study it is based on focus on how laws affect women around the world, the truth is that individuals of all gender identities and expressions may experience discrimination and gender-based violence. Women, girls, and people who are transgender or gender nonconforming face a disproportionate risk of discrimination and gender-based violence across every context due to their unequal status in society and lack of legal protections. Billions of women still do not have the same legal rights as men. Women continue to face major challenges that threaten to widen gender gaps and entrench existing inequalities. This lesson is entitled Barriers to Marital and Property Rights and Protection from Violence. In this lesson, we will look at the impact that laws concerning property administration, inheritance rights, marital rights and duties, and protection from domestic violence have on women's economic participation. Finally, we aim to understand the power of civil society actors in advancing legal reform. This lesson was written by the Women, Business, and the Law Project at the World Bank and is based on more than a decade of research and analysis. The project measures laws and regulations that affect women's economic opportunity in 190 economies. The project provides data and insights to individuals, governments, policymakers, and businesses to help create more inclusive legal frameworks and support women's economic empowerment. Women, Business, and the Law focuses on the critical relationship between gender equality and women's economic participation, finding that good practices in legislation are strongly associated with their increased empowerment. In addition to guaranteeing basic human rights, greater legal equality is associated with a larger supply of female labor, a smaller gender wage gap, higher levels of female entrepreneurship, and a greater number of women in managerial positions. Discriminatory laws prevent women from fully and equitably contributing to their economies. Globally, only 14 economies have reached legal gender parity, meaning that women in those economies are on an equal legal standing with men in all areas measured. This means that a majority of economies worldwide still have a long way to go. Access to property and holding assets is fundamental for women's economic empowerment. Improving women's legal rights to own and manage property has positive impacts on a variety of outcomes, including labor force participation and earnings, access to credit, and human capital, to name a few. Access to property can both increase women's financial security and provide women with the necessary collateral to start businesses. Of the 190 economies studied, 76 still restrict a woman's property rights. The highest scoring regions on the Assets Indicator that analyzes gender differences in property and inheritance law are Europe and Central Asia, OECD High Income, and Latin America and the Caribbean. The Middle East and North Africa region lags behind. For example, in 18 economies, the law does not grant spouses equal administrative authority over assets during marriage. In 43 economies, male and female surviving spouses do not have equal rights to inherit assets. In 41 economies, sons and daughters do not have equal rights to inherit assets from their parents. The laws in 18 economies contain legal provisions that require a married woman to obey her husband. 28 economies do not have legislation specifically prohibiting domestic violence. An example of legislative good practices is Gabon, where the law grants men and women equal inheritance rights, stating that males and females are equal in their right to inheritance. In 2022, only Uganda instituted new reforms in the area of property and inheritance rights. In April of that year, Uganda enacted the Succession Act, which regulates the management, administration, distribution, and acquisition of property and the rights of a deceased person. In addition to adopting gender-neutral language, the amendment specifically removes the provision that favored a male heir over a female heir. Now sons and daughters and male and female surviving spouses have equal inheritance rights. Legal constraints related to marriage and divorce also have critical effects on women's economic empowerment. Currently, women continue to face such restrictions in 89 economies. Where these constraints persist, women's decision-making powers within the household are weakened. Empirical studies suggest that different rights in marriage can affect women's ability to negotiate within the home and impact women's financial security in the event of divorce and the right to remarry, hindering their economic participation. When women have less bargaining power at home, they have less ability to pursue professional roles outside their household. Some restrictions currently in place: 18 economies still legally require a married woman to obey her husband. Women remain unable to obtain a divorce in the same way as men in 46 economies. Globally, women in 68 economies face restrictions on their ability to remarry. Another example of legislative good practices is from Benin. According to the Family and Persons Code, divorce may result from mutual consent by the spouses or from a court decision at the request of one of the spouses. No differentiation based on gender is made when it comes to exercising one's right to obtain a divorce. The Women, Business, and the Law Project also researches whether women are legally protected from domestic violence. Communities with specific laws on the issue are proven to provide a safer environment for women and report fewer domestic violence cases. The recent data shows that in 28 economies, legislation either does not specifically address domestic violence or does not provide sanctions or protection orders. For example, Lesotho, Niger, and Togo do not currently have legislation addressing domestic violence. Adopting and enforcing laws against domestic violence, in addition to strengthening women's decision-making power, could help to curb the prevalence of domestic violence and its related economic costs. 2 positive reforms were recorded in the Republic of Congo and Côte d'Ivoire, both introducing legislation addressing this issue for the first time. Not only governments have the power to advance reform in their countries, civil society does as well. For instance, community service organizations are crucial for women's economic empowerment as they play an important advocacy role. One notable example is their influence in driving positive reforms in Kenya, such as the enactment of the Sexual Offenses Act and the Protection Against Domestic Violence Act of 2015. More action is needed to accelerate gender equality, and it will take the effort of everyone: governments, civil society, private sector institutions, and media to make this happen. For more on this course and to access related resources, visit our website.